down this road with me.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Speak Project. My name is Stephen Rao, and this is a kind of an added bonus feature. Not exactly breaking news, but certainly intel that needs to be shared urgently and immediately. So we have invited back our very special guest, Michaele Walker, who is going to expound on some of these things. And as I'm obviously fighting off Harley Davidsons at the moment. But anyways, just to give everybody an idea, this is a Speak Project, and the entire concept behind this is that we want to change the world. The world has been under a certain type of structure which has allowed very few people to really thrive and to prosper, while the rest of us, well, basically they do it at our expense. And our goal is to rejuvenate and revitalize the communities, the heart and soul of the human spirit, and give people the tools and the necessary information to do that. Now, obviously, we would much rather always spend our time talking about solutions to the various problems, but first we have to identify what these problems are. And I am of the belief that we absolutely have to expose these things, no matter how hard they are to kind of digest for some of us. And with that in mind, we get all types of information. We have really amazing sources, and we do have ways to cut through those things. And Michaele Walker is really a champion for this. She's out there on the front lines, 5'4" and furious, right, unrelenting, which I think is really what it takes, because the actual strength of someone's spirit really has no limitations. And she's a great example of that, and I'm excited to give her a chance to talk about that, and I'm in full support of getting her message out there and sharing these things so everybody knows what's really going on behind the scenes. Now, I want to point this out. My goal is always to make you care about yourself, really about the world you live in, because the enemy is not even the ones we're talking about. It's not the order, the deep state, the cabal, the Illuminati, the secret societies, whatever you want to call them. Believe it or not, they are not the enemy. The real enemy is indifference. It is apathy. It is people are walking around in this world today and every day completely oblivious, and they have tapped out. They just are used to being entertained. They spend a majority of their days and nights being entertained, and this is setting up a program that everything is okay. But there's a reality going on here, and we're going to talk about today, and Michaele Walker is going to blow our minds as she always does. So, Michaele, are you on the call?
I am.
I knew you would be. It's always a big long pause, but then I expect to hear that Southern Belle voice. So, Michaele, where do you want to start today?
Well, good afternoon. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Wonderful. Couldn't be better.
Okay, so I agree with you. You know, you and I were having a discussion early this morning and about, the importance of this is that we make people realize to wake up, and that sometimes you hear things about people, last week I was talking about bar, and that we remember that people can change, but I think it's, what I was telling you this morning is that we also remember that people have done certain things that are in political positions, and that we hold them accountable for what they've done, and that we make sure that we begin to wake up and hold people to a higher standard. Because, I believe what they've said, it's the American dream because everybody's asleep. And I believe in that quote. And they call it the American dream because all of you are asleep. And I agree with that. And so in my research, I do want to point that out, that sometimes I may speak of someone who is trying to make a difference now or is on our side for right now, but we still need to look at their connections and make sure that we're holding everybody accountable.
Absolutely. Michaele, it's so interesting, I always, it's actually, I believe, a famous quote, but the first person I ever heard say this was my 6-year-old. When my son was 6 years old, he woke up from a deep, deep sleep, and he came out of bed, and he's like, Dad, I was having the best dream. And it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, I was ironing clothes. And I said, well, man, why don't you go back to bed? Because he didn't have to be at school till like 9 or something. And he said, well, Dad, the first thing you got to do to make your dreams come true is to wake up. You know, and I never forget that. And I actually, David Haight credited him with that quote. But I believe it's a famous quote that someone else has said. But as far as I'm concerned, that was my son, Jordan, who said that.
At 6 years old, how would he, know necessarily that quote? And I think that we all have somewhat those same revelations of, when are you going to wake up? It's amazing that we say those words at last night before most people go to bed. I had posted there are things we can do, but from the things that work, there are only two. And from the two that we choose to do, peace will win and fear will lose. It is faith and their sleep. We need to pick one, please, because faith is to be awake, and to be awake is for us to think, and for us to think is to be alive.
Yes, I love that. Well, let me just hit this real quick. So, as I promised, and I know Michelle and I are going to work very well this way together, because both of us are constantly in pursuit of the truth, and not just the truth, but how do we, change the very harsh truth that we get exposed to at times. And I will say this sparingly that Michelle had mentioned some things about the Barr family being a CIA family and being actively involved in perpetuating essentially a civil war. And I'll say this: I do believe that is true. That is a part of the history. And I don't doubt that. But it sounded to me that there was potential there, because this is kind of what the deep state does, right? They dig up some piece of information, not considering there's, like Michelle said, there people may have changed, and I said I would check it out, and I did. And now, again, these sources, there's only one source I trust absolutely, who I know has a much broader perspective on things and won't lie to me, which is Kim. But this is from my other sources in D.C. who did actually say that Barr has changed teams, and he is working for us, which, by the way, in my opinion, that is very comforting, right? He did say that the move of the deep state right now is to really discredit Barr and ultimately discredit Trump, which I mean it doesn't really seem like a secret agenda. Obviously, this is what they're pushing every single day. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the absolute truth, but I just feel it's important that we give the full story the best we can and kind of get an idea. And what I think, Michelle, personally, is that we understand their tactics more so than, sometimes even the intel. Because when you understand their
about was, if he got knocked off, was, Barr. And what I just want to continue is, like we say, is that we report the truth, and, as intel comes in, and, it's very important for me on my work that, when I get my intel, I want people to know that I check my intel 20 times to make sure that it's not true. That's how I work my system. I try to take it and prove that it's not true. And but then when I get something and then Stephen came back to me and said, hey, we've checked this out, and I think it's very important that we let the listeners know that this is what's been said, and we keep that in mind. And like I said to him this morning, that I do believe it's very important that we remember that people that have made mistakes throughout life can change. And so I think that's very important.
Absolutely. Michelle, what I think is amazing is that we often forget the importance of listening and finding everything and having everything in front of us instead of what we think is the way we should think. We're conditioned that way. So when you came in and gave us something different, that upset people. But it's more beneficial than it initially sounded. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
No, regardless, it's history. You can't deny that he had a history.
That's right. You have to look at the connections. Now, the importance of it, as I think, is you look at maybe those people that have not changed, and make sure that they don't try to change what we're trying to do right now. And but I'm a very firm believer is do not get stuck in your beliefs or knowledge or your education. If you hear something, you have got to stay open and that person can change, or that the intel is different now, or something has, I always tell people, like in law, I study law a lot, and the Constitution and Congress and legislation bills, and in that it's a building, it's like building blocks, and so I may think that a certain affidavit would work this way, and then as I learn more, then I realize, hey, there's a better way, or there's a different way. And I think it's very important that we learn to retrain ourselves to be willing to accept a new way, because a lot of us don't do that.
No, we don't, because we're conditioned. Many of us are, and a lot of us have woken up. But in order to really stay awake is that you have to look at everything. What you discovered was something we didn't think to look at, or we didn't want to look at. Some of us didn't want to look at it. We liked that he sat right next to the President Trump. That felt good. You know what I mean?
Right. So, and I always...
Yeah. It's very amazing how information can either change you or, put fear in you. Right.
And I'm the biggest believer. I mean, I work with, prison reform. I write prisoners who are actually going to be there for life. And I write them letters to motivate them to be peers to people that maybe not be in jail for life. And encourage them of how to deal with these things. And the reason I do that is because I believe that, I am not a perfect person. I make mistakes every day, and I would hate that someone would hold me or discredit me by one mistake I've made, or a time in my life that I wasn't in a good place. And so I think that every single person has something good in them. And I think the art and the way that we change things is that we find the good in people and we uplift those good things and we point out the good things. And so with bar, yes, there's some things that we don't like, but if you're doing a good job and you're doing some good things, let's encourage that and let's keep going with the good things.
Absolutely. Can you tell us more about what you found? That was bar. I think we've nailed that.
Yes. Okay. So
concerning the sex trafficking, I think that's something we really need to open up more.
So today we're going to be talking about, it's kind of going to be building up, this week we've got a lot of information, but this, today we're talking about how they've broken the family unit and trafficking children, and the importance of this ties into the children, and the reason it is very important is because it ties into the Clintons, it ties into your ports. I'll actually be able to bring you the picture showing you where it ties into with the Clintons tied in ports for that actually was in no interest protecting the U.S. national security. And what we're finding is that these are easy ports to move children. And so the element of really exposing the child trafficking and how many children come missing a day in the U.S. Is so important because that industry is like the biggest industry. It's over an $80 billion industry in the U.S., sex trafficking and child sex trafficking in the United States. And the United States is actually the number one consumer for child pornography. And so when we talk about the foundation, this is something that's on top of the foundation. You know, we're trying to get down to the foundation, but you got to deal with these things here that are part of the evil and part of the darkness. And so today we're going to be talking about that. You know.
Oh, wow. Blows me away to think our children. And just in America, I mean, you talk about America, and that is overwhelming in itself, but to think how it affects everybody globally, too.
Right.
It's staggering. You know, it's staggering. We should be all outraged. Please continue.
Every 40 seconds in the U.S., a child comes missing. And it's an average around 2,000 kids a day. And so just think about that 2,000 kids a day in the U.S. become, missing. And, what would you do if you were one of those 2,000 families today? And what would you be feeling if the media doesn't report it, or you found out that, the Amber Alert that we all had this faith in that was put in place to protect our kids. But then when you look at the Amber Alert, you realize that one of the heads is, the lady that was caught in Haiti with the Clinton Foundation trafficking kids, and the Clinton lawyers got her out, and now she works in a very high position with the Amber Alert. When you look at the Amber Alert, you can also see that just, recently they're advertising that part group went to the Podesta group, So when you and I, when you're good people, you think that these places, the national, and I'm not saying all these people are bad. I'm saying that the system has got some issues that's not infiltrated, and obviously, you and I do not see every 40 seconds an Amber Alert. And I know that there are procedures where we've been conditioned to think that, it's a runaway teenager, and so it's not important. And it may, and it may be a runaway teenager, but it may not be,
right,
because the sex industry is so huge. And so, throughout the day, I want people to realize that, every 40 seconds, a child comes missing in the, U.S., and that according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 800,000 children are reported missing in the United States a year.
That's crazy. Amazing what the number tells you. We don't look at the number and go, until you actually listen to more than one person say it. Because it used to be a conspiracy theory, first of all. Let's get that out there. The idea of children going missing because of child sex trafficking was considered a theory, a conspiracy theory at some point. It is no longer that.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to talk about. We need to, understand that was never a theory. It was just something that nobody talked about.
Right. And when I was looking, I'm a statistic person. I love numbers. And when I was looking at the U.S., and then I looked at India, and India has 96,000 children. And, you know, I just think, okay, like, well, you know, why does our number have to be at 800,000? And then, again, I think that America really needs to look within itself and realize that we, again, are the number one consumer for child pornography and the number one consumer for sex trafficking, child trafficking. And we have to start looking at our moral compass and holding people to a higher standard before we go into other countries and say, hey, I think you need to hold your group to this standard, because we're not doing that at home. And, you know, I'm a firm foundation that, you know, what do they say? If mama's not happy, nobody's happy, you know? And and so, you know, your family has to look at the ugly, fix the ugly, and I think that's where we are. I know that is. This is where we're at right now, is that the picture has been painted for so long that, you know, America is the greatest country in the world, and we are so great, and we're so morally high, and we like to hold other people to this high standard, and we do not hold ourselves to this standard. And one of my favorite all-time moments on TV was Newsweek. Do you remember that episode where,
yes, I do, actually.
You know, where she says, she's asking them why is, you know, the United States the greatest country, and, you know, he says it's not. And it was jaw-dropping, but it was, you know, true. I mean, look how many people that we have in prisons. Look at the industry of that. That's a private, you know, prison sector. And so, you know, we really have to start looking at, believe that we need to fix our own country, and, you know, because what has been going on is we're all being played, and your children are a hot commodity, and, you know, you listen to all these major news outlets. This weekend, you know, there was a major news outlet on in our house, and they were talking about Iran, and, you know, my partner was, like, listening to it and believing what they were saying, and I walked by and said, propaganda. That's propaganda. And, you know, and he was like, what? And I said, that's not true. What they just said is absolutely not true about Iran. And anybody that is looking at the Iran situation, I tell you, you need to go read Operation Norwood. And before you believe what you're being told, every American should read Operation Norwood, because Operation Norwood really is an eye-opener to 9/11. Operation Norwood is from during the Kennedy time. It literally talks about, you know, taking planes and painting them to look like commercial planes and hitting buildings, so we would think that we were under terrorist attack. And
so I see the importance of that document. I think a lot of our listeners do know what that is, and some of them don't. So it's good to get all this information out. Is there any other piece that's important that you might think is important for everyone to know as far as the daily propaganda? Like, what can they do? What are the solutions? And like, you know, what can we actually do to, like, fight that? You know, we're propagated every second of our lives. You know, it's very difficult to know what's true anymore.
It is. I think that is, you know, looking at, we've been trained to look what is in front of us, and you have to, you know, like if you and I were standing in the yard, you might be looking at my yard, and someone else may be looking at the road, and I'm the person that's looking past the trees, the other neighborhood, looking around, going, okay, what's going on out there? And last night I said to someone, they said to me, what do we do? And I said, you have to stop turning the TV on for your information. Your information's in your neighborhood. Go outside and talk to your neighbor. Go to your communities and talk to people. When you start talking to people, you find out their life stories. You find out really what's going on in the world. And again, become just unplugged from the matrix. You know, it's you know, but it's a part of a system. I always say that, you know, people tell me I don't like politics, I'm not political, and I'm like, well, politics likes you. You know, they're in your life whether you like it or not, so you better learn to, like, you know, play the game, get in their life, and hold them to a standard. And the reason that is so important because, you know, we have this drug war that, you know, used to be opioid issue that's so important because, like I reported the other day, the opioid issue ties into Florida literally setting these high-dollar recovery centers for our children to go to. And then they bill out the insurance as much as they can, and then they will let the child overdose, and they will then, you know, remove organs. And, yeah, that's right. And so, welcome back. And so, you know, we have the.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think one thing that is missed a lot of times is we tend to hyper focus on one issue at a time, and because of that, a lot of people miss the glaringly obvious connections when to all of these things to one kind of master plan, right?
Right.
Now, in this, you know, when you start talking about the drugs, now, the mainstream opioids, right, that are out there, in many ways, first of all, anybody who's, you know, kid gets hooked on some kind of drug, these drugs are not manufactured, you know, always the way they say, right? Like meth, okay, there's meth labs and things like that. But for the most part, these things generated from some organization that was, you know, some pharmaceutical, you know, organization, some government organization, the CIA, and they've modified and manipulated these drugs, and then they release them out into, you know, the kind of the subculture to experiment with. And then they examine them, and they watch what happens with them. And what you're talking about is what I see more and more of, which is where they're not hiding so much anymore, right? They're taking the kids, and they're offering it like a service. They're even having the insurance companies pay for it, right? So they can exhaust this, you know, kind of the illusion of wealth that is created by the insurance companies because we're paying premiums that are, you know, if we just paid for the doctor, almost no one, you know, no one would pay more if they just paid for their. In large part a way so that they can track every single thing that we do, right? And part of tracking what we do is to know exactly what's working on us and what's working to suppress us. So taking our kids and getting them addicted to opioids is a plan. Then offering insurance to pay for the opioid problem that they created is part of the plan. Then they use them as perfect candidates, right? Because they're young people, as they're weaning them off these drugs. And then they die. And then they just harvest their organs and they use the kids again. So much in the same way a butcher uses every part of the animal, that's very much the same way that they exhaust all of us. They just wear us out with the repeated, constant barrage, so much so that it's almost hard for people to even conceive that that's real. I mean, where else do you see connections like that?
Well, you know, I'm glad that you brought like how they start this. I was at an educational summit 2 years ago. Probably will never be invited again, you know, because I was there actually representing military children. And it was with all these educationers. Walmart was one of the main hosts. You know, and there were senators there that were on this board, and they were literally talking about the plan was to put your children in school at the age of 2 and 3 years old. And they were talking about the brain and how this was so important. And but then they were talking about the issue with the children now, and you know the prison system as kids 18 and 19-year-olds. And I listened to this for a half a day, with one of my friends, and I was just sadly writing notes and looking at the eye roll. And we came back after lunch, and I finally just put my hand up, and I said, I'm sorry, I've listened to this bullshit all day. And first of all, you don't need a child in school at 2 years old. It's not the government's job to raise my child. And that's what you're wanting. You're wanting to raise my child, and it's not your job. And I said, and secondly, I said, the reason those kids don't sit still in school, and then you have the kids that you're talking about here today that are zombies, is because you've drugged them. We have right now 0 to 1 year olds, 125,000 American children on psychiatric drugs. 0 to 1. 2 to 3 years old, you have 202,319. 4 to 5 year olds, you have 306,079 kids on psychiatric drugs. And I said, right now in the U.S., we have 80,280,000 people on psychiatric drugs. You created the drug issue. And what you did is you drugged these kids while they were little. You kept them on the crap, and you had kids that could not handle it, that they don't learn, or they're hyper at school, or they're zombies. But then what happens is when they turn 18 years old, they become off of parents' insurance half the time, or they're at a parent's homes, or parents are no longer paying for their medications. But they need something. They need the high, and therefore they go to the dang street and they get on these drugs. And then you have the crime rate. You have them stealing for the medication they need that you created. And then you have the prison system. I said, y'all created this issue, and now you think you need these kids at the age of 2? And that's what's happened. That's what people need to realize. Let's go back to, I'm in my 40s, and I do not remember one single friend telling me, oh, before I go to school this morning, I got to take my ADHD medicine. I've got to take, my lorazepam so I can handle Ms. Clark's test today. And we have Big Pharmacy who has created this issue to drug our children. It's a vicious cycle here. And you've got to wake the heck up. And I'm not saying that some children don't need these things, but there's no way in hell that you're going to convince me that between a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old right now in the U.S. that there are 3 million children who need to be on psychiatric drugs. And if that is the case, our culture has got some issues. It's not the child, it is the culture. that is my problem with this. And what happens is we drug them, and then we use the government funding to build these great rehab facilities. We bill the crap out of the insurance. If they run out of insurance and the child is not secured, they'll kick them out on the street, or they make sure they don't really heal them, and then we put them back out there. They do the same thing with veterans. That is one of my hottest topics with the veterans. And the average veteran is on 17 medications. And I have, last year I was meeting with the Director of Veteran Affairs, and he was like, well, they're trying to get the veterans off of, the opiates, the medications, and I was like, yeah, you just cut them off at the VA. You just have cut this off, but you are the one that created this problem. You send them to war, you give them, so many supplies, here's your baggie of stay awake, go to sleep, and there's nobody watching their medication, and you drug them, and then you bring them home, and you want to take them off their medications so they commit suicide, or you want to keep them drugged so they're not awake. It's the veteran that has the issue. You create the damn problem. And they've done it with our children. They've done it to our veterans. And if you want to get me, on a hot topic, and those are the two things that I'm willing to go to war over, is the commodity of a child, and to use a veteran who has signed a blank check, and you bring them home, and we have them homeless, and we have them where they can't get medical care, and there's no excuse for it. We are, it's America, for God's sake, and we can do better than this. And until we finally wake up and realize that our children are modern-day slaves, and right now in your schools, you got, the Common Core was the biggest freaking disaster, in education that could have been put in place. I fought that from the very beginning. I literally pulled my kids out of school when Common Core was put in place. And, but, when we have corporations running education for your school, do you realize that in Common Core, by the time your child graduates, the government actually has 777 intel documents on your child by the time they graduate. Right. And I tell my children, and you need to be telling your children, you tell your child if they're asking you on a survey, does mom and dad have guns in their home? You don't answer those things. Does mom and dad do this and this? That's not their job. Their job is not to get their statistics or their intel from our children. Your children are a heritage from God. They do not belong to the government. They do not belong to the state. They belong to you. And we have, through the cycle that's been broken, the disconnect has, I'm a huge champion against CPS, DHS, CPS and DHS is, it is the port to child trafficking. 88% of children in sex trafficking in the United States came from the foster care system. And
so CPS is Child Protective Services, and you said
right,
the other one,
DHS.
Oh,
Department of Homeland some people call it, Department of Child Services. So in some states they call it Department of Child Services. In some states they call it Child Protective Services. So I usually will reference them as CPS. But Child Protective Services in the sex trafficking stage in the United States, this is the FBI, says that 88% of those children have been in the foster care system. That is a system that is not working.
Wait, what? Say that again.
Yes.
Say that statistic one more time.
88%. You heard me. And that is an FBI number.
Okay, so let me just break just for a second from this, because I really, these things are essential to point out. Okay, because you can get completely consumed fighting these things, which all of these things right here, these are symptoms of a much larger disease. Okay, so take it a step back. Where does this start? Now here's where if you take it back, there was a movement. This was implemented around the time when Carter was actually setting up and taking federal control of the education system. That's where he set up the Department of Education. And from there, that grew out to be standardized testing. That's where we have the implementation of standardized testing. Now, standardized testing, basically, if you're testing everyone the exact same way, as if they're all the same, this was their measure, so to speak, of intelligence, right? They wanted to measure who was going to conform to the system they were implementing and how effective the implementation of the cultural guidance is that they're utilizing, right? And in this, they would identify different groups. They would segment people. They would allow different groups to excel to different universities. And then they would have different programs within those universities that would literally modify their behavior and feed them a certain false education for the most part. They would take some basic truths and then they would modify them. This is well documented in the actual the PSYOPs program, the psychological operations program that has been led by the CIA since, 1950 something. And it's actually documented on their website. And you can actually see very specific universities that were used all over the place. And they used the universities, and then they brought they brought it from the university down to the high schools and down to grade schools, middle schools, and now they're completely indoctrinating our kids to the point where in California they're teaching pedophilia as a perfectly normal sexual orientation to children that shouldn't even know what sex is, right? They're actually teaching that even at the preschool level. They're actually teaching them very in-depth, descriptive perversions about sex as well, and they're teaching all of these things as if they're perfectly normal, as well as teaching 15 different types of genders, which I can't even, I've read them and I still am totally confused about what the heaven they're talking about. Now, all of these things, now you wouldn't necessarily connect all these different things, but in reality, this is not just to feed their insatiable appetite for perverted hedonistic practices and molesting children and and doing horrible things. Although it does serve that purpose as well, it's actually designed to create a population that does not reproduce. They do not want humanity to grow anymore. This is you can see this on the Georgia Guidestones that are literally, it's not just it's a real term. It's written in stone, their plan. And in their plan, in these same Georgia Guidestones, there was a compartment. And in that compartment was a complete blueprint on how to use cancer and various other diseases, as well as vaccines, to reduce the population in the first place to create their version of a utopia, which means less of us. And the 500 million people that would be here, they would do exactly what they're doing to us now. They're enslaving us. That's what they've been doing. They've held us in slavery. And in this system, they essentially don't want you to ever reach any real potential. They don't ever want you to be completely happy or completely competent or independent. They don't want your children, they don't want any of our children to think. what they want to do, and they actually identified this, that we were getting too smart in the 70s, right? And because we were getting too smart in the 70s, they launched a program to dumb us down. And around, I guess the early 80s, somewhere in that range, is when they really started to implement the Hammer Project, which there's a couple different Hammer projects, right? And one is financial, but the Hammer Project that they're referring to right now in kind of the alternative media is where they're gathering every piece of information about you, and they're sculpting the reality you live in. They're literally creating the environment you live in by controlling what you think about, what you care about, what you believe to be true, and really it goes all the way down to the educational level. So everything Michelle talks about, all these things, they're all part of the same plan, and the plan is genocide. Make no mistake about that. I have seen the plan. This is a real thing. That is not speculation. That is not theory. That is not intel. That is fact. The entire Agenda 21, which has now become Agenda 2030, what they call sustainable development, is nothing. It has nothing to do with us as far as making us healthy and happy. They've created a disease on the planet that they identify as us, and they're trying to eliminate us as we speak. And that's exactly what, everything that you're talking about is witnessing to.
And, the importance of that is, like you say, it's what is the end game? And the reason it is so important why I say your education system, your drugging, the vaccinations, and CPS, and the reason I always really talk about the children is because 89% of the children that are in CPS care currently right now do not really have true a true threat. It was a false accusation. There's not really a reason for that child to be in the system. 89%. And that is numbers from senators. And so when you have 89% of American children and a CPS, which is a private entity, and I get so mad when people say Child Protective Services is a government entity. No, they are not. They are contracted. It is a private entity. You have to realize that all these things, the police, the bar association, they're all private. It's a membership type thing. That's how they're protected through the system. But when you have 89% of these children, that should not be there. And then, so that's, look at the importance of this is, first of all, they will come into your home without a warrant, and you see that at 3 a.m., police coming in there, beating doors down, taking a child home. This just happened in Arizona. I was actually, when this happened, it was national news. And the mother did not believe what the doctor said. The fever had went down. She took the child home. He was trying to say the child had meningitis. The child did not. And at 3 a.m. in Arizona, the police went in there and busted the door down. I was actually on the phone with that family, with throughout the other person, and trying to stop that as the police were beating on the door. They came in and took the kids. They just got the kids back not because the child did not have meningitis, the child was just sick, not because the parents were right, because the state and the attorney of Arizona did not want to return the child. The children were only returned like 2 weeks ago because of the public outcry and the media attention. That's why our voices are so important to this movement. And that's why I am screaming about Child Protective Services in our court systems. And the reason I say the reason you have to really look at the children is because when you're removing all these children, what are you doing? you're breaking the family dynamic. You break the family apart. And Stephanie, I cannot tell you how many cases that I work on that literally, imagine being married to your partner for 20 years, and the state says, hey, if you'll divorce your partner, we'll let your child come back. Not because there was a marriage issue. It's not one case, and it's not one state. That was, the importance of looking at things to, for us to fix this is we look at patterns, correct? So I could look at my state in Arkansas. Well, that's where I started. And I just started hearing these parents' cases and saying, they said I failed a drug test and I was not taking drugs. So here in Arkansas, with Child Protective Services, I literally had a mother who they said she tested for cocaine. She went to an independent lab the same day, did not test for cocaine, okay? Now, they still do not have their child. They literally lost their child. And that drug test was fake. It was unreal. This literally up to the point in court, like 2 weeks before, they did another urine test, and someone broke into the box at the clinic and only stole her urine. I mean, that is, I'm telling you, this is not just like, oh, they knocked on the door and took someone's kid. No, this is a system. So in Arkansas, what I realized was the people that were doing the drug testing are the same people that are contracted to do the rehab for the parents that the state requires them to go do to get their child back. That would be a conflict of interest to me.
It certainly is a conflict of interest. These things, what's so disgusting to me is that every time I hear these pieces, I can see how they're moving it in every other direction, because what they'll do is they'll take a portion of the population that they won't touch, and however they designate that, it doesn't really matter. It can be different for every community. And so when you hear outcries of things like this from a completely separate section of the population, right? Because if they were hitting everybody, kind of, a little piece of every community, what would happen is we'd all know what was happening. So what they do is they divide us, and they will devour one community. And when they cry out, the other community just thinks, well, geez, that's just how they are over there. I never have that problem. We never have that problem. And that's the mentality, right? And this is the kind of nonsense that takes place all the time. They diminish people's resources so much that they have to get help at some point. And then as soon as they get help, I cannot emphasize this enough. Do not go to any government program for help. Don't look for welfare, anything. One of these programs, every one of them, they are set up to destroy you. And as far as separating the family unit, this goes way back, right, to the feminist movement.
Correct.
The feminist movement is all designed, right, just to make it so, women have to leave and you have the home. Now you don't have a stable figure at home for the kids. And then now, you have two incomes, but no one really got any further, right? You'd think if a family was making, two incomes, we'd be in such a better state. Everybody would be doing so great, right? But you don't have that. What you have is, you have other people raising our kids. Michelle, the year my sons were born, I will never forget this. I was in Queens. And the year my sons were born, there was a woman at this preschool, and she had molested a 4-year-old. And when she was interviewed, this was her quote. She said, "He came on to me." Right? That's what she said. So she was blaming a 4-year-old for being molested because a 4-year-old, was whatever a 4-year-old did that this woman perceived it to be, a come on, which there is no such thing as a 4-year-old come on, by the way. So with things like that. Now, yeah, go ahead.
You're right. That button right there took me back to I have 2 beautiful daughters and a son. And in the public school, boys can run around the school, right, for football, track, and you'll see them running without their shirt, sometimes, on a hot, day, and they get by with that. Or boys can wear shorts, they can wear anything. But God forbid if my daughter wears a shirt that doesn't cover her shoulders or her skirt is 1 inch above her knees. And I remember one time my daughter had a shirt that the sleeve didn't completely cover her shoulder. And this teacher, who is no longer there, told her that her shirt was inappropriate for the boys and it was distracting and she needed to wear her jacket. And she said to him, if this is distracting to you, you're the one with the problem. And I have an absolute problem that we have taught in even our public schools, that like girls have to wear certain clothing in school because if she's wearing a tank top, you as a boy, that's distracting, and it's going to be my fault that you don't behave properly. And that's messed up. It's not, now I'm not saying you should be able to wear anything, but it shouldn't be on the responsibility of a woman that we have to, I can't go out in a short skirt, and because I wore a short skirt, that gives you the right to rape me because you liked my skirt. No, it's not my fault. It's your fault. Because we have built as a society, even our schools, that, these girls have to wear the clothing. Our daughters are trained to wear different clothing, and they're conditioned that their behavior, if they don't do something and a boy acts a different way, it's their fault. And it's not.
That's a really good point. This is a big thing they do to everybody on some level, and they're constantly, this is a very common, I was just, reading, I was reading your report, and I confirmed it with other places. You have these young kids who, they were supposed to come right home after school or something, and on the way they stop at the store, end up getting kidnapped, and then now they're getting raped and they're sold into prostitution, and the whole time they're shaming them, telling them that their parents don't want them anymore because they were disobedient. They mind wreck them. They completely destroy their psyche, right? Where they think that they deserve to be treated this way, and that's what happens. I mean, they do that, and they do that with everybody on some level. But definitely, it's like, why don't we teach our young men to protect women anymore? Or that makes me a chauvinist, right? Because I'm a, however they want to phrase it, because I think that men should protect women, or men should not hit women. I saw this. I taught in South Jamaica, Queens for 2 years, and I watched this, and I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and I would watch how commonly accepted it was that the boys and girls would every single day break out into fistfights with each other. And there was absolutely no shame. There was nobody teaching these boys, you cannot hit a girl. There was none of that. Matter of fact, I watched horrible things happen. In this same school, they were actually, the school in Hollis I was teaching at, they were shutting the school down, right? So they were going to shut it down and reopen it the next year. In the time they were shutting the school down, it was a crime scene. I mean, the whole school was ridiculous. And this happened. There was 2 gangs. They were MOB, right? One was a, money over, B for dogs, right? And money over brothers. So it was a boy gang and a girl gang, right? So these 2 gangs. And so the girls in this classroom, I'm talking about in the middle of the school day they did this. They went up and they surrounded the teacher's desk asking questions, pretending to be engaged with what the teacher was saying, right? And they asked all these questions. They completely distracted the teacher. And then while that happened, the boy faction of that gang, they took a girl in the closet right there, and raped the girl in the closet during class, during school hours. That kind of, because it was, and I was in teachers' conferences where kids would come in, and I mean, just belligerent, and they were bragging, right, because they were trying to be tough because it was a constant fight. And this was the environment they created in this area, right? And so, and I have to say, this is part of what they make available and constantly do. It's the reason why Prince got taken out, because he was talking about the chemtrails, how the chemtrails are a bunch of things, right? There's smart dust and there's all types of things that are bad for us. But they also have activating stimulants that they literally put out into the communities, right, to cause communities to, to structure their behavior. And in this community, I remember talking to this one kid who both of his parents had AIDS, and they were dying. So his life was very stressful. And he was bragging to everyone. He was in 6th grade, by the way, 6th grade. And he was bragging to everyone how he had so much sex, and he had got like 3 girls pregnant, and he was really boastful about this, right? And this was normal. It was a normal thing to say. It wasn't abnormal at all. In the same school, I took a knife from a kid who was a little chubby kid, and he was getting bullied every day. And he would come talk to me every day about it. And then one day he had enough, and he came in with a knife to kill these kids. I had parents show up to fight me, right, because I disciplined their child. And and I was white and still am white, but and they came to fight me. They, like, literally thought they were going to show up and beat me up. I had this was all in this one school. I was only there for 3 months. I watched them come down the stairs with a name belt, and it was a flood of people coming down the stairs, and this girl was beating another girl over the head with her name belt, and she was saying, "You are going to remember my name," right? And there was all this identity. So they created this identity, right? And people want to blame the culture, because that's what they want to do. They want to pit us against each other. So they want to say, well, that's because everyone there is black, and that's how they are. That's not true. That is an absolute ignorant. It's just professed ignorance, because I was one of the only white my family was the only white family in an all black church, and we traveled all over the country to every place we went was all black. That is not how all black people are. I lived in South Jamaica, Queens, with a black family, and it definitely is not like that. So it drives me crazy, because that becomes the accepted norm, right? That's what Candace Owens is always talking about, how they create this illusion that serves people. Now, in the same community, right, they are perpetuating, the need for this, how great it is for everyone in that community to have these abortions at 40 weeks, right? How now you have this great option, right? And I was speaking to someone yesterday who's a very intelligent guy, and he literally said to me that he doesn't even care if they kill the baby. He said, because that's what he said. He said the last thing you need is another unwanted, black kid in the world. That's what he said. Now, that speaks to the real deeper problem of what they're trying to do right now, and they are trying to break the heart of humanity. They are trying to detach us from what it means to be human. And I keep talking about this. I keep talking about till this. Well, yes, but even more. See, we are reliant as human beings on a natural instinct called philoprogenitiveness, right? The natural love for our offspring. Now, that natural love for our offspring, it extends not just to the individual who had a child, but to all of us. We all see a baby and should be touched, by that. We should all want to take care of and protect that child, right? I mean, just naturally. I mean, not to go out of our way necessarily, but if we saw something happen, we certainly would want to pick the baby up, make sure the baby's okay first. We would all do that. That's what it means to be human, right? Now imagine what they're doing with these bills they're passing, right? Like Illinois just made it legal for 40-week abortion. they made it mandatory that insurance companies have to cover the entire cost. And they also authorized partial birth abortions, which is basically where the doctor allows the legs and the arms out of the woman through the birth canal, and then the baby's there kicking and moving, and then the doctor literally punctures the skull and vacuums out the brains of a living child.
Mm-hmm.
That is partial birth abortion, which is a horrendous practice. He just made that legal, as well as if the baby somehow survives the abortion, they will not help it. They cannot. It's against the law. And then still, this is promoted as women's rights. That this is empowering the women. When did it become empowering the women to be able to kill babies? It's just
I never felt like when I for the moment I became pregnant, I was immediately protect. I never felt that my job was that child had violated, that was me. You know what I mean? Like it violated me, or that if I could kill my child, that gives me power. I felt like that, my body was just the host, the amazing gift to give life and to protect us. And, kind of a funny story about how people are being, like you were saying, they don't realize life, and it's in us. It's in us as women and men, but I'm speaking right now as a mother and as a woman, and because I'm absolutely against the vagina hats and all that. I am a firm believer that the men should be the head of the household. And, I know people are going to be like, that's why he calls her a Southern Belle. No, I just believe that I want my man to protect me, and then my job is to be the mother, the protector of the home, and to be the supporter of the men. And I believe that the men should be the voice in this change and demand that you stop allowing these children and being a commodity, a hot slave, that you should be the loudest voice. It shouldn't be the mothers. It should be the men. And
I agree.
But a few weeks ago, my daughter, she's 16 years old, and she had the assignment of the fake baby, from school. And she had to have the baby for 48 hours. And it was set to literally cry every hour. And they've smartened up. She had to wear a bracelet. So she was definitely the one that had to stop the child from crying. She would have to, the baby doll, would have to ring the bracelet. But what was so funny in this was, when it first started crying, she fed it and fed the bottle for like 5 minutes. And she takes it away and it starts crying again. And she's like, how long do I got to feed this thing? And I was like, until it's full, And so that night, she said, I just fed it. I just got to go to sleep. I'm going to go take a quick shower, and surely it'll be fine. And she's like, will you just, Mom, watch it for a minute? And so she goes and gets in the shower, and it goes off while she's in the shower. And she runs out of the shower, and she's just drenched, trying to stop the baby from crying. And she was so concerned. And now this isn't nothing but a baby doll, but it's the instinct of that this is a baby, this is a mother. And then at one point, the baby had not cried for a little bit over an hour. And she said to me, Mom, I actually wish it would cry just so that I would know it's okay. And I said,
I totally remember that. The first baby's always like that, right?
Right. And I started laughing, and I said, that's so funny because when you're, you, like the first night that they sleep longer, you're waking up going, is something wrong with the baby? Is something wrong with the child? But again, that was her, this is just a baby doll, not something that she's carried for 9 months, but she was, the instinct in her was to nurture and make sure it was okay. And so, I think that we've had the agenda and the media has been a war on women, and I think that there had to be a war on women to accomplish Agenda 2030. Because we see too many single parents, and single parent families can be a father raising a child, a mother raising a child, but it's rough when you're just one parent. Like you said, we have both parents working jobs, and now to survive, there's a lot of families working 3 jobs a day, and I believe that this was all their agenda so that it could break the family dynamics. They could completely control these generations to make them robots, and you become the slave. You become all they're using you for as your energy to be a robot to make their product. You're not living. That's the problem. You're just surviving. You're just getting up and you're going to work and you come home and you're going straight to bed. That's not what life is about. Life is about love, kindness, changing and living, and getting to know your neighbor, getting to know that Vietnam veteran, listen to their stories, and the reason they don't want you to know those things is because if we all have importance of mankindness, it messes up their plan. When you become a rake, and when you put out love and respect, my father always said to me, you don't think like a woman, because I would say I would rather be respected than loved. But I believe that you do not love someone until you respect them first.
Respect them. I totally agree. I don't think you can be loved. If you don't respect somebody, you can't possibly love them. As a man, I feel
right. And right. And so I've always said, no, respect me. And I believe that with respect is even with your enemies, someone asked me last night about, a tragedy that's happened in my family, and they said, if like an eye for an eye is basically what they were asking, would you, if you found out this person, would you take them out? And I said, no, that's not my place. And I said, their judgment is not my place to judge. And that's not saying that I don't believe that person shouldn't be punished. But it's not my job to take the law in my own hands and to punish people. And we have a system, and I believe the system should be used, but I believe the system should be also very effective.
I would argue we do not have a system. The very evidence
Correct.
of that is that, and I'm not saying we should violate the law because I don't want anyone to get in trouble, but I will question, first of all, if the law is in place, then laws should be enforced equally across the board. Everyone should be enforced. Laws should be enforced, period. That does not take place. It is well known. I know this for a fact. I spoke to the NYPD myself. I know when they pulled Anthony Weiner's laptop, they looked directly at irrefutable evidence of heinous sexual acts committed with many, many different politicians. Least of which, not least of which, is Hillary Clinton and Uma Aberdeen, who sat there and filleted a little girl's face off, who was about 9 years old, after raping her, sodomizing her, and in addition, they literally they terrified her, tortured her, then drank her blood. That is known by the NYPD. They sent that video out all over the world as a, not to convict her, but as a way to ensure themselves. And they are that the NYPD is compromised on that level, at least. That, I'm not saying that all the NYPD is bad. There's a lot of good cops there, but they're compromised because they're controlled by these Clinton cartels, because they have this power and they have a whole other position. They operate in the real laws. Now, there's a real draconian law system which has governed everything. Then there's monarch law. Then there's the royal monarch laws, which is essentially it's not the kings and queens. It's the dragon families, which is like the Rothschilds and the various secret societies who essentially enslaved even the kings and queens. So what you're witnessing right now in broad daylight, I've watched this happen. I had an $8,324,000 transfer that went into Wells Fargo. I have the transfer number. I have confirmation that it arrived there, that was sent directly in my account. They stole the money from my account in every aspect that is it's grand theft, it's whatever, it's money laundering, whatever they did with it. There's an FBI investigation filed on that transfer. Do you know what the FBI did? Nothing. They don't apply the law. They don't enforce the law. So it's very questionable to me, in my mind, because I'm not one to advocate, because I don't want people getting hurt. But their laws, I challenge all of them. I can hardly see a single law that is really in effect that helps anyone. And as far as punishing people, first, there is self-defense. Every single person is under attack. We're being poisoned in our water, poisoned in our air, poisoned in our food. At what point, if you identify someone poisoning you, are you not allowed to defend yourself? If you identify someone hurting anybody's children, it's imminent danger, right? Like, don't we have the right to defend that child?
I carry at all times, and I am a firm believer that I promise you, if I pull my weapon, it's not going to be pulling my weapon to scare you off. And because if I feel like if I need to pull my weapon, it was a life and danger situation, and you're not going to walk away. And I do feel that way about my home. I would agree with you on the court systems, the law systems. You and I have talked about. My father owned a government. He was in the defense industry, 32 years in Arkansas. My father is one of my biggest heroes, businessman, very prideful in his work for the government. And there was a breach, and this started in November 2017, and this is government. We're talking about your warheads, your HIMARS, your PAC-3, all of those things. And that dealt with Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, all these corporations. And in one day, there was over 86,000 documents stolen in just one day. And there still has not been a single arrest. I know some people that were involved. I know them by name. And nothing has been done. And we called the police there like 4 times. The police reports wouldn't get filed. And so then I did like you would think. So I called the prosecuting attorney in that area. And they're like, okay, you're right, blah, 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 we'll look at it. And then they would disappear. And so then I was like, okay, my police station in this area is not doing their job. And so I'm calling the Arkansas State Police, and I'm going to tell them to come take jurisdiction because that's what the protocol is supposed to be. I literally called the state police in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Her name was Donna. And as soon as I gave her my name, she said, "Oh, I've already been called." And she said who she was called by. And she said, "We were told this is a family situation and we're not coming." And I said, "When did the Arkansas State Police decide to stop not coming when a crime has been committed because of the family situation?" And I said, "This is not a family situation. This is like your warheads, your government drawings have been breached." They refused to come. The FBI was in there for 4 months. And I'm talking about, 6 to 7 people in there weekly, IT people, 6 IT people. I know what that breach is. I know who is involved. We're talking about, and not a single arrest has been taking place yet. And so a few weeks ago, I called the FBI in Arkansas, and I went up to higher up to the chain. And this man says to me, "Oh, well, I was told there wasn't really a breach." And I went off, I started letting him know, you call me 5'4", but I'm actually 5'2", and let me tell you, you get a 5'2" Southern girl hot, it can get ugly. And so I went off on him, and I said, "What IP address do you want? Here's this number, here's this number, this number." There was a breach. And I said, "So who bought you off? Who bought you off?" And he was like, "Well, I can go back and talk to them." And I said, "Well, I tell you what." I said, "We've done it your way for a year." And I said, "We're not doing it your way anymore." And I said, because as soon as I hang up the phone, I'm calling the Department of Army and the Pentagon, and we're going at this a different way. And I said, "I'm not going to drop this. You don't understand. I'm not going to array." My father's work of 32 years had to come to an end because of people breaching a system and because of money and taking our government, things that we use to protect, and nothing has been done to this day. And it's not going to go away. If it's the last thing I do for my father, I will make sure that there is justice served because on every level that I believe is wrong. And I told that FBI guy, I said, your ass should be in jail because you're not doing your job and you are compromised and you've been bought off. And I said, and I will expose every bit of you. And I said, and since you haven't handled this, by the way, here are some more people. I gave names. And I said, they've had a $20 million contract from the government, and they do not do the job. The Lockheed Martin employees do the job, and they build houses for certain buyers in this town so they can get a gravy train. And I gave him the names, and I said, and now I just reported you another crime. And I said, you better do something about it because now I just reported it. And by the way, I was recording your conversation. So I have a proof that I gave you this crime. And we're still fighting it. But they don't do their job. I cannot tell you, I had a child that was in a home, and I knew was being sex trafficked. It took me 2 months to get a burner phone to this child to be able to call me. And she called me on a Sunday, and she told me she was 13 years old, that she was pregnant. She was put in place there by the CPS, by the way, Child Protective Services. and they were going to kill her. She had to get out of that house. I mean, she's like, I've got to get out of here today. And she was begging me to come pick her up. Well, I can't go pick her up, personally. And so I start making arrangements to get her safe. And it was on a Sunday. I was having a hard time getting my regular contacts to get her out of that home. And so I called the police department there. And the guy said, as soon as I gave him the name, he goes, I'm not going there. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I'm not going there. He said, we're not allowed to go to that house. I said, what do you mean you're not allowed to go to that house? And he goes, well, you're right. It's a home that does that, and we've been told to stay out of that house. And I said, you should go to prison yourself. You are in the position to uphold the law, and when you do not uphold the law, you are just as guilty. I say that to people all the time. Once you become aware of what's going on, and if you don't do anything about it, you're just as guilty. When you look at the National Report on Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking, America's Prostituted Children, that's who this comes from. So, and this is not, Michelle statistics. This is not conspiracy theory. The National Report on Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking, America's Prostituted Children says that children exploited through prostitution report they are typically given a quota by their trafficker or pimp of 10 to 15 buyers per night in America. A child had to have 10 to 15 people to buy them off. Can you imagine that? As a human being, Stephen, can you imagine having to service 10 to 15 people as a 12-year-old? And that a domestic minor sex trafficking victim in the United States will be raped by 6,000 buyers during the course of their victimization through prostitution within the first 2 years of their prostitution. They're part of the slave. 6,000 buyers. When you have 6,000 buyers in America having sex with 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, the damn law system is not working. The government is not working for you and I, because there should not be 6,000 buyers per child in the system buying these kids. They should be scared to death that if they dare even thought about raping a child, they're going to be put to death. They're going to go to prison for life. Their life is over. And we don't hold people accountable. You let someone rape a 3-year-old and they go to prison for 2 years. That's not justice. That's not a system that works. And what you find is what people don't think about is you think, oh, okay, well, they were raped, they were in the prostitution system. What you're not realizing is this child has not fully developed. Their natural immune system is now infected by AIDS, syphilis, hepatitis B. And since the age of a child to enter forced prostitution is 12 to 14 years old in the United States, most of them die within 7 years of their first sexual act and to their first child prostitution. If that is not a war on your child, you have 800,000 American children come missing a year in the United States, and then I'm telling you that America is the #1 consumer for sex trafficking, and then when I'm telling you that a child has to have 10 to 12 buyers a day to have sex with, they have 6,000 buyers within 2 years, and that if they are in prostitution within 12 to 14 years, their life span is 7 years? Come on, guys, we're better than that. And every one of you should be outraged. You should be angry that in America that we have allowed this sexual perversion to be allowed and to be okay on your children. And the dang problem with this is that we're not only raping them in our country. When we get done with them, we kill them, and then you do the organ, the organ donor, and to the person that can pay the price. If there's a person in the public eye or that's rich can pay $40,000 for a kidney, guess what? Your life may have a target on it. And because in America, in a 5-year span, there was 40,106 organ transplants in the United States that has no unknown source. Now, the last time I checked, we can't go to Walmart and buy a dang kidney. So where's the unknown source? And why? And who's doing it? And these were in hospitals. This is not black market. 40,106 that were in American homes. Why are you doctors doing these organ transplants if you don't know where the source is? If you're in there and you're making that transplant and you don't know where that source came from, you are part of the crime. You are just as guilty. If you're the nurse that's on the phone covering up for these people, it's not your job. You're not doing just a job. You are part of the crime. And that's where we have to start looking at. If you want to do the change, we have Senator Nancy Schaefer was murdered because she had recorded them removing American children on American planes, a full plane of children, and taking them to China. She recorded when they left and recorded when they came back. And they did not come back with all the children. Those children were given up for organ donors, American children taken from American families.
Michelle,
and she was murdered.
Could you please repeat? Could you please repeat that? I need you to repeat that.
Senator Nancy Schaefer was murdered because she had recorded American children that were taken from Child Protective Services. She had recorded them leaving with these children, a plane full of American children with certain senators and a certain political person. And she waited until they returned. And they did not return with all those children, and they had proof that those children had been taken to China for organ trafficking. That is what got her killed.
Wow.
And that was not a murder or a suicide. That is what got her killed. And, the politician who, and you know who you are, who announced that morning that both of them died of freaking cancer that morning to a group of political people, you have got blood on your hands, not just Nancy Schaefer. The people that have covered up for Nancy Schaefer, who was murdered for putting her life on the line, like a lot of us are, for the American children and all these other children. You told the people that they died of cancer, and then they became a murder and suicide. Every one of you who have lied, every one of these senators that you know who you are, you may not be part of the crime, but every one of you that are sitting there, you know what the heck is going on, and you're not going to your communities, and you're not telling the people, guess what, people? They're loading your children up. And the people that have sit there and said Nancy Schaefer was a murder and suicide, you are a liar. You are a flat-out liar. And everybody that has covered up that crime, you are not only guilty for her and her husband's death, you are guilty for every child that was sold, and you are guilty for every child that is still currently being taken because she had the footage to stop it. And when you stop these things, when you kill whistleblowers, when you take the price to take someone out, you are responsible for what happened before, and you're responsible for everything that continues. And so when the people that are listening to this, you know who you are, and I know who you are guilty for a lot of deaths. And let me tell you, your judgment day will come. It will not only come by us who are becoming aware and awake. Your judgment day will come by the day that you die. And I hope someone has mercy on your soul, because I absolutely do not have mercy on your soul. And what has happened with, just like he said, with the Wiener's laptop and the police that cover up these horrendous crimes, the doctors that perform these abortions, I don't care if it's put in law. I do not care what a piece of paper says. If you're the doctor that is willing to have a baby that's wiggling, and you are willing to suck the brains of a child out, you need to go home and really look at your moral compass and look at your psyche and wonder out what the heck is wrong with you. That you would cover these crimes and that you would take a life.
The laws in place are how they dance around in the dark. Tank got knocked off, so of course we're always over the target. And thank you so much for coming on. We're going to leave it right here. And, I want to thank everybody for listening in, and anybody who's just tuning in at the end, come back, because there's a lot more to talk about. Thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on. You're doing a great thing. I appreciate it. We all do.
You're welcome. And, the reason I know today you're kind of like, okay, where does this lead? I promise you we're opening Pandora's box to show you where it leads. And it leads to national security issues. I'm going to be able to show you Air Force bases, contractors, and so today was very important for you just to really realize the commodity on your child and the perversion and where all these billions of dollars is going to cover these crimes. If we can stop the crimes, then look what else we could do with this money in this world to make a difference. And as always, you know me, I don't like to leave on negative. And so my thought is just today is just to ask people to stop judging people in your community. If you see a family struggling and you're like, well, CPS took their child, they couldn't feed their child or whatever, instead of asking the government to take that child away, if you're a church or something, go help that family. Other day, we left a concert and my partner saw someone sleeping outside Walgreens, and he was like, look at that part. They're just asleep right there at Walgreens. And I said, maybe that's the only place he has to sleep. Maybe he works. Maybe he's just homeless. Maybe he's had a hard time. I said, you don't know his story. Don't judge. You don't know their story. And it's impossible for me to know your life, your path, your story. And until you can walk in someone's shoes, you can't judge. And it doesn't matter what people go through. We have to start putting love and light out there and stop going with what they want us. They want us infighting. They want us judging all each other. And we have to stop doing that. We've got to start seeing, okay, we're all a family. We all are humans. We're all in the same fight together. And let's show love. Let's show kindness. And let's hold people accountable who are not doing their jobs. And thank you for having me on the show today.
Anytime. We'll see you again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, this concludes our show. We'll see you again soon. No retreat, no surrender. Bye-bye.